into the garden is to pull out the weeds. You don't go, oh, how do I feel? Maybe it's helpful to know you're tired or you're feeling happy. That's not the point. The point is you've done the job of pulling out the weeds. But we're so obsessed with feelings, and we believe that meditation's about feelings, feeling better. It's a mistaken even question. Who cares you feel? It's a bonus if you happen to calm down. That will be an advantage. If your mind's berserk and you sit for 5 minutes watching your breath and you calm your berserk mind, that is very good. I'm happy for you. But if you might end up feeling more agitated, that doesn't mean it was a failure. Because you come in from pulling out the weeds, you've got a knee ache, doesn't necessarily mean it's a failure. The job to be done is getting more focus. The bonus might be you might feel more calm. In the long term, you're going to feel blissfully calm. But that still isn't the point. Are you with me?
Yeah.
See, if we judge our meditation based on how we feel after it, then you're going to fail most of the time. Or just because you feel good. If you sit down for 5 minutes and watch your breath, and your mind's really agitated, and you're not wishing the thoughts to go away, because often that's why people meditate. They want the thoughts to go away. It's completely the wrong view. It's not even the point. You need to see your thoughts. The real advantage is if you come out of your meditation and you think, God, my mind's getting much worse, that's a good meditation, because now you're noticing the weeds that you didn't see before. And now you know that they're the things you've got to pull out. So that is a good meditation. Oh, you with me, Uzi?
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
Yeah. Ne.
Good. Ne? Yes. That's right. Yeah. Everyone's different anyway. I mean, it depends. Some people I know, to sort out their problems, they need to sit down on their cushion and settle down and get some concentration and then go through the problem. Depends. Another person wants to do it while they're running. Another person wants to do it while they're doing the dishes. The real point is to see your mind. I mean, see your thoughts, see the chaos, see the drama, see the attachment, see the anger. This is the point of it. And then to know what to do with it. You understand? What am I doing? Okay. So, okay. I think we'll talk about the death process, the death business. I'll look at Lama Zopa's book. Okay, so this book I edited in Rinpoche's. It was interesting. It's, okay, one of Buddha's first teachings, most obvious, and the Buddha's teachings are essentially him saying, listen guys, this is how I found the world to be so, and this is not how we see it right now, so there's this big disconnect between what we see and how reality is. And so this is his view, right? He says this is how reality is. So one of the first ones is that, guess what, people? Everything changes. So it seems to me, like I said before, because we have this immense craving, immense neediness, immense emotional hunger to have only the nice things, or to get what I want every second. It's pretty primordial. Then naturally, because we can't stand the thought of not having the nice things, we impose this other lie on top of it, and we think it'll last forever. Equally, when we go down to despair, we think that'll go to last forever as well. So this grasping at things as permanent, which means grasping at things as not changing moment by moment or not changing forever. This is one of our biggest sufferings, So one of the ways to, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, one of the big things to get in touch with is not just in general impermanence, which can sound very nice, but in the particular impermanence of death. So in this kind of packaging of the teachings that the Tibetans use a lot, it's called the Lamrim. Some of you are very familiar. The agenda here is to not just think that things are changing. They are, but the real one to get like a wake-up call is to think that I am changing, that this thing I cling to most strongly, that I'm attached to most strongly, that I totally, that I can't bear the thought of not being me. So a really practical way to think about is to think about not just impermanence, but the impermanence of this person, and that's called death. So in our culture, that's like shocking. Like you're going to be depressed if you think about death, because we want to live in denial of that type of impermanence. It's too painful for us. So there's three main points here to think about. They kind of give like bullet points, And the first one is to think about how death is definite. Well, it's sort of obvious. But yet we live in denial of it. We can't bear to think about it. And it just seems, like I said, really depressing to think that you might die. So what? Then what? Then what? Well, just like that holiday, if it's only 9 weeks, if I'd start to forget that it was impermanent, then I'd start to cling to things, I'd get lazy, I'd wake up in the morning, oh, I can't be bothered, I can swim tomorrow. Then you put things off because you think it's going to last forever. And suddenly one day, the real estate lady would come and drag me out the front door kicking and screaming because I forgot that it was impermanent. Well, it's the same with your life. Because we cling to ourselves as permanent, and this is a very deep delusion in the mind, very primordial. We don't do it intentionally. So the very first thing to get the wake-up call is to recognise that, guess what? Death is normal. Death happens. Death is one of the certainties of life. And so the wake-up call has to bring, what it should bring is some sense of urgency. Not just, oh yeah, I'm going to die, so what? The second point should make us even more, give us even more of a wake-up call, is the time of death is definitely not definite. As Lama Zopa says, it's best to think I'll die today. But this sounds like ridiculous to us. We can't even get our head around that. What the hell point will we be doing that for, The whole point here to think about impermanence and death from this perspective to utilise in our life is to give us the wake-up call to realise that this life is precious. So, okay, we don't have that concept at all. We think God made us, we think Mummy and Daddy made us, we think maybe it's precious sometimes, it's usually a big drag. I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, and because we're always miserable, we always look at the bad things. Well, the Buddhist view is just to realise the amount of karma we must have practiced, the amount of hard work in the past, the Buddhist view, to just get a human body, it would completely blow our minds. It would blow our minds to realise how much virtue, morality and goodness and generosity and kindness probably practiced in the context of a spiritual path, the Buddhist view would say, that programmed us to even go to that mother's womb,
But where is the sense of urgency?
I'm about to tell you. I haven't finished yet. Give me a break, Uzi. I'm talking as fast as I can. Okay, so the first point is, bloody hell, I'm going to die, The second point is, I could even die today. And the third point's the point. The third point is the point. That's where the sense of urgency comes. That at the time of death, which is when the mind leaves the body, you've got to ask yourself, at that point, what's useful to me? So you've got to take the Buddhist view now, given that my consciousness goes back and back and back and will continue when I die. This is the first step, the first given. Second, given that every millisecond of what I think and do and say will leave seeds in my mind that will necessarily produce my future. It's not given to me, it's not an accident, I cause it. And third, the crucial point, given that every millisecond of what I do that's labelled negative, which is actions based on attachment, anger, fears, depression, jealousy, low self-esteem, ego grasping, etc., and this is a technical point, will ripen as my future suffering. Now what does that mean? To spell it out, if we look at the Four Noble Truths, the deepest level, the heaviest level of suffering is to be born. This is so abstract for most of us, right? But I'm going to say it, it's okay. To be born, to take a really suffering life. To be born as an animal, to be born as a spirit, to be born as a hell being. The Buddha would say the biggest number of sentient beings are having these types of mental experiences right now. These are mental experiences created by that person, individuals. It's not places where you're sent by somebody. So of course it's abstract for us. But this is actually Buddhist psychology. So given that you'd think, that level of suffering, I don't want suffering, given that I don't want suffering, and that's the grossest level of suffering, then even if you can't cope with that one, even if you can vaguely have the concept that you might get born again, then forget about being born as an animal, but being born as a human. But now look at human realm, and you can observe suffering, even the grossest level of suffering. People are living in war zones, people are living in terror, people are enslaved, People are raped daily. People are stolen from, abused, harmed, terrorized, bombs dropped on them. People have crummy relationships. People are beaten. People are lied to. People are sacked from their jobs. People are homeless. I think we might notice on the human planet there's lots of suffering. So even if you can't comprehend being born in another type of realm, if you can even imagine taking on board this view that your consciousness is a continuity, that everything you think and do and say produces the experiences that you will have, that you have had now and that you will have in the future, if that is reasonable, then you can think, well, guess what, honey, I don't want that kind of suffering. So if you can't visualize, if you can't imagine future lives, then you don't need to worry about death, okay? This is not relevant to you. If you don't think of future lives, death is not relevant because you don't care when you die. Because if you turn into dust, who cares? This is a really important point. So if you can't think of reincarnation, just listen to this and dismiss it, you know. And everyone's different. You can do what you like. So the only reason to think about death is if you can posit reincarnation. There's no other reason. Because if you're going to die, you're going to die. You won't know the difference, will you? That's really logical, isn't it? So if you can posit the possibility of your consciousness continuing, as Buddha is saying, then clearly, just like it's exactly the same, if you've got a garden and you know that you, in 20 years, assuming you're still alive, you want veggies and fruits in your garden. Well, guess what? That determines your actions right now. You don't wait for 20 years and wonder where your bloody vegetables and fruits are. You've got to plant the seeds, baby. And you know you don't want a garden full of weeds. It's the same logic. It's the same logic. So if you can, you know, deduce the possibility that your consciousness will continue, as Buddha is suggesting, and that you know that if you do live in 20 years, you want to be happy and not suffer. Just like the same, if you know you want to be happy in 20 years' time, you better, and healthy, you better not eat too much now, and you better eat the right food, because 20 years you'll have your teeth, and you won't be overweight and obese and sick with cancer and God knows what. So it's the same logic, except you're extending it to beyond this life. The principle is the same. We get this. We understand the future, you know. So we make the future, Buddha says. So that follows logically at the time of death. The only thing that is of no benefit to you, well, first of all, your body is of no benefit, your hubby, your pension plan, your house, your children, they're not much use to you. You can't take them with you. We all know that. The other thing that really is the worst that you do not want is the negative imprints of your negative actions. You don't want the weeds. So therefore the only thing you do that is of any good to you is the imprints in your mind from practicing virtue. It comes down logically to that. That's it. So what is used to you at the time of death when your mind leaves your body is the virtue you've practiced, the non-virtue you refrain from practicing, the habit, the programming of giving up delusions and growing virtue. That's the bottom line. That's the sense of urgency. So given that you could die today, whatever seeds are in your mind at the time of death, whatever's most prevalent at the time of death, that's the seeds that will determine your future. So it's a practical issue if we can posit these possibilities, that's all. And because we cling to things as permanent, we can't bear the thought of not being me. That's the thing we cling to most, especially on the basis of this body. Then we can't even imagine death coming. So we live in denial of it, so therefore we never prepare. And really, as a Buddhist, you're not even preparing for death, you're preparing for the next life. And I know this sounds so abstract to us. It sounds like a religious concept. But it's up to us whether we take this on board or not. And because we're the boss here, and what you have in the future, and we know this in ordinary terms, whether it's garden or bodies, we know very well, you've got to start creating the right causes now, today, this second. And because death will come, and we're not clairvoyant, so it could come today, I know it sounds so cosmic to us, then we better start, you know, practicing now. That's the general approach to this. But because we're so used to hearing it in a moralistic, religious way, it kind of sounds so heavy. So don't hear it as heavy. Hear it as practical. It's practical, you know. It's practical. Given that your consciousness is a beginningless and endless continuity of mental moments, given that every millisecond of what you think and do and say sows seeds, given that every one of those seeds will either ripen as happiness or suffering, there's one or the other, there's no option, and you do want happiness and don't want suffering, well, there's a logical conclusion. Start sowing the good seeds and pull out the bad seeds. Same as your garden, same as your healthy body. like anything. Same as your bank account. You don't wait for 20 years' time to get the euros in your bank. You start putting them in now. It's practical. Here it is practical. So this book of Rinpoche's is about how to help your loved ones. It's framed in that way. You know? And he says, if you're going to help anybody in their life, best time to help them is at the time of their death. And there's practical reasons for that, you know. Because the way they describe the death process, in the Vajrayana tradition, the more advanced Buddhist teachings, those yogis who've been through this experience and have total memory of it, and then who write about it, who explain it, then, because we have this massive grasping, this massive attachment to me, then the worst suffering at the time of death is the fact of giving up me. The worst suffering is immense, unbelievable, intense attachment. So when you think about attachment, it's got many facets, like I've been saying. One aspect of attachment is always wanting something more. They're always thinking about it, imagining it, wanting to get it. Then the manipulating to get it. Then the expecting of the happiness to come when you've got it. But another aspect of attachment, which is the one that's most powerful at the time of death, is in our daily life, this is like the motor that propels us, it's that part of us that's always looking forward to something. We get, like Melanie said, we get bored. It's true. We have incredible boredom. Either have aversion or boredom. So attachment pops up. What do I do now? Now I'll do this, and now I'll have lunch, and now I'll have that, and now I'll have afternoon tea, and now let's go out now. Let's go out. Now I'll go to bed. Now I'll get up. Now I'll have breakfast. Now we'll go to lunch. What do we do now? Now we have afternoon tea. And what do we do now? Now we go to dinner. What do we do now? Now I'll watch television. What do I do now? Now get me. This is attachment, and we're always looking for something to do to keep us excited. It's how we are. It's attachment. And look what happens when there's nothing to look forward to. That's called depression. Literally. Depression is the reverse of attachment. There's nothing to look forward to. So what about death? The thing we've all lived in denial of. We can't even bear the word. We're so programmed with permanence that it's just like a joke. And if we do think about it, it's a long way off, isn't it? You can't see the end. You can't see death coming. It's a long way. It's coming somewhere. So meanwhile, attachment is this little perky part of us, looking forward to this, looking forward to that, looking forward to this. At the time of death, finally, you're realizing, it's dawning on you that there's nothing to look forward to. Assuming you're a materialist. So like I'm saying, in the world, there seem to be general views. There's views of people who believe in a creator. There are views of people who have the view of karma. Not, the Asians, a few Buddhists and those people. Then there's the materialism, which is probably the major one for most of us, even if we say we're Buddhist. That is, I'm my body, and when I die, I turn into dust. That's your philosophical view. Well, but at that point, you've all got attachment. At that point, all you have got to look forward to, which is why the nightmare, is a black hole. Is nothingness. It's like beyond shocking. It's the worst one possible. No wonder people die with so much fear. One friend of mine who worked in the hospice movement in America years ago, she said it was a given among her friends, who were working as nurses, that most people die with incredible distress, which is called fear, because there's nothing to look forward to, finally. So it's just nightmarish fear. So that brings this immense attachment of clinging to what you've got. You're holding on. The thing about attachment is, if there's something to look forward to, then you cling to what you've got. You can't bear the thought of not having it. And they say, in the 12 links of dependent arising, and there's a chapter on that in this book, and I'll read you to it, it's very interesting. There's this sort of process we go through every second, creating countless lives of samsara. This different 12 stages we go through every minute of the day, we're doing them. So Lama Zopa says that at the time of death, the 8th and the 9th of these 12 links, as they call them, that are called craving and grasping. And they're two intensely extra powerful levels of ordinary old attachment, which is the one of holding on to something, not wanting to give it away, not wanting to lose it. This is the energy, the primordial fear that attachment brings. You can't bear to not be you, and it's especially the body. This arises unbelievably intensely once this death process starts. And that's usually a couple of hours. This actual death process, which I'll read through, starts a couple of hours before you stop breathing. And once that starts, then before you even stop breathing, this intense craving and then grasping kick in so powerfully, and more powerful than normal attachment. And that is why there is so much fear at death. They're quite technical about why it is, you know. And that's this utter, absolute panic to hold on, to not let go, you know. You can't bear the thought of not having. This is why there's so much suffering, apparently. That's why I just find it, my own comment, interesting. You know, like the big thing in the West these days about we've all got the right to kill ourselves. And it's true, we've all got the right. We're in charge. No one needs to tell us what to do. We have got the right to kill ourselves. We have got the right. No one says we haven't. But like anything, if you've got the right to do something, it comes with understanding what's involved. Pretty clear. You've got the right to run across the road, but you better make sure there's no cars coming, dear. You'll be in trouble. So you've got to know what's involved. So here we're using the Buddha's view, of course. And it seems to me, you know, we've got this intellectual idea you're going to kill yourself when you get sick. So you and your wife agree you're going to have this, do this, you take the pill, blah, blah. But with respect, you know, we've not been through death before. Not that we've remembered it. We have been, Buddha would say, but you don't remember it. You think you've got this intellectual right to kill yourself, but then you're not going to factor in this intense fear that will come when you start the death process. It will be absolutely primordial. Apparently they say that. And that's why you need to be with your loved ones, to help your grandma, your mummy, your daddy, your sister, the dog, the mouse, to die peacefully and virtuously. There's two things. So in general, as we're understanding from this talk about the Buddhist view of the mind, when the mind is very attached or angry, it's intensely fearful. Fear is its taste. Fear is its nature. Fear is the energy of all these delusions. So when the mind is loving, compassionate, wise, the mind is clear and calm. There is no fear. So the key job in helping people die, helping them at the time of death, you know, is helping them become peaceful and virtuous. That's it. And why that? Because at the time of death, in this technical process that occurs, before you stop breathing, as the death process has actually started, and before you get to this, described in terms of 8 stages of this gradual deconstruction of all these components of the person. And by the time you get to the 4th stage, which is where you stop breathing, and you're not dead yet, you've still got 4 stages to go, according to the Buddhist view. But before you stop breathing, before you lose all your grosser level of consciousness, that's when this grasping kicks in, which is so intense. And that grasping is the catalyst for the number 2 of these 12 links, which is the karmic seed in your bank vault. That will trigger that particular seed, which will be the one that will program you into your next life. So that is the period when a person needs you to help them most, to be calm. So if they're a Buddhist, you know, for example, you'd have your Buddhist images around, you'd say prayers so they hear, because the Buddhist view is whatever you hear and whatever you see, especially those 2 senses, will leave very strong impressions, imprints in your mind. It's like you're taking photos. One Lama said it's like in our lifetime, it's like we're shooting a movie throughout our whole life. You're taking photos and everything is stored in your mind. So what we need at the time of death is very strong images, very strong imprints. So if you're a Buddhist, you want to die hearing the prayers, hearing the mantras, hearing the voice of your teacher, because this will steady your mind, you know. And it'll put those imprints and it'll help your mind be calm and steady. If you're a Christian, if your mummy's a Christian, talk to her about God. In this book, there's all these sections of what to do. Rinpoche's got many, many practices. There's about 87 of them all in the back of the book. But in the different stages, what to do the weeks and months before death, what to do to help your loved ones the hours before death, the moment of death, the days after death. There's all these different scenarios, you know. And there's different things to do to help the person's mind be virtuous and peaceful. And then after they even stop breathing, it could be 3 days before their mind leaves the body. I know that different religions have different views and the materialists think different things as well. But this is the Buddhist view. It could be 3 days before the mind goes through the more subtle levels of deconstruction before it actually leaves the body. So the crucial thing the months and weeks before, and this was obviously as a slow death, is to make the scenario as peaceful and as conducive as possible for the clarity and the calmness of that person. So this is why, you'd almost say that the worst place to die is in a hospital, with all respect to nurses and doctors. It's noises, it's distressing, it's loud, there's different people, their families coming and going. If you've got your own private room, if you're rich enough, great. The ideal scenario is to die at home. We get loved ones around you, the people who are in charge of you know what's going on, you understand the death process, you keep the troublemakers out of the room, you make the room beautiful and peaceful. So while your eyes are open, it's not just chaos, because usually sick rooms are so horrible, Even if your loved one's in a coma. This is a very interesting point, by the way. Even if a loved one's in a coma, we tend to think, oh, they can't hear us. But this is not true, I mean, for example, there was one guy recently I read about a few years ago, this Italian mother. Her son went into a coma, and she didn't want to pull the plug, So he was in a coma for 25 years. He woke up, and he said he was conscious the whole time. I remember one time, this process that they describe in the death process is exactly the same process, by the way, that we go through when we go to sleep and when we dream and when we wake up. It's exactly the same physiologically and psychologically. I'll describe the process, So when you're in a dream, I remember one retreat I did, for a couple of weeks during that retreat, we'd go it was in India, we had our nap. We have our nap after lunch. And I remember, because when you do retreat, your mind gets sometimes, very clear, berserk, but clear too. It was a 3-month retreat, 12 hours a day meditating. So I remember, that my dreams for this period after lunch were crystal clear. And I was completely conscious of all the sounds going on and what people were saying and doing. That can happen. So that can be exactly the same as when you're in a coma. I always remember when you took me to see your sister, Nasita, wasn't it? Yes. And I remember you showed me her body. I remember you, and I was just suddenly thinking, even then, I wonder if she's noticing I'm here. Yes. Do you understand? So when you're I remember my own experience of a person in a coma. She was a sort of a Buddhist, and she was old. She was old, and I think she went into a deep coma, and she was in the ICU, or whatever they call it. And I went there at night, just to be with her, and to say sort of prayers and things in her ear. So she was deeply in a coma. They didn't think she'd come out. In the end, she came out. But what happened was, on these nights I'd go to see her, every now and again I'd say, Judy, Tsongtsa Khyentse Rinpoche is praying for you. These lamas she knew. Judy, His Holiness Sakya Trinzen's praying for you. Well, she came out of her coma, and she said the only thing she remembered was those words. She remembered nothing else of those weeks. You hear many stories like that. So that's in her deep coma, she heard those words. So there's something, so even when your loved one's in a coma, you still, if they're a Buddhist, you have the prayers on, because it can go in more deep, because your coma mind is the same as the subtle mind. Well, there's gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, very subtle consciousness. Our dream mind is the subtle consciousness. That's the same as when you're in a coma. And like I'm saying from my experience of mine, I was also conscious of the sounds. My friend Judy, even though she was in a deep coma, remembered those words I said. So then while even your loved one's in a coma, that's you should do the same. Make the room peaceful, have only prayers on, everything to help their mind be peaceful, everything to help their mind, to make a connection, let's say, if they're a Buddhist. But if they're a Catholic, the weeks before, there's a whole section of Rinpoche's what to talk about. Well, talk about God. Talk about heaven. At least something for their mind to relax, Not sure, it doesn't matter you believe in heaven, I don't care. If they believe in heaven, be kind to them. Don't rave on, Mummy, there's no heaven. Tell them about heaven. Tell them God loves them. At least the bottom line is it makes their mind peaceful. And then the tricky thing is that, if you're attached, if you use your attachment to look forward to something nice, and it makes you virtuous, well done. Go for it, baby. It's kind of skillful means, Are we communicating here? This goes for your dog and your cat as well. And the mouse. Let it be peaceful. Instead of killing the mouse, killing your dog, put it in a quiet place, let it hear mantras. This is the Buddhist view. Let it be peaceful and calm. And then when it does die, that'll help trigger a virtuous karmic seed. If the mind's freaking out, it can only trigger a negative seed. This is the Buddhist idea. Any questions about that?
Yes.
Yes.
According to Buddha, we die endless times.
Hey, what?
We have died endless times.
Absolutely, yes.
Are we learning anything through this process?
Well, you'd know
every time I die, it's my first time. My mind.
I mean, if you're not familiar with having if you don't remember any past lives and you don't remember dying, then we haven't learned much, have we? If you can't remember it, clearly we haven't learned much. That's why it's so important to, if you are choosing to be a Buddhist and take on board these views and you understand the process, you try to meditate on this process before you die. I'll go through it so that at least you're more familiar, and then thinking of your life being impermanent while you're living so you're not shocked when death comes. That's the way to learn. We probably have done it before, but we keep doing that. And eventually when you get really highly realized, you will go through that death process with complete control. I'll read about this as well. You can, then you're really learning from it, you know. Yeah. Anything else, people?
In hospice, they are being drugs, and they are taking opium. Does
Morphine.
Morphine.
Morphine. No, this is a very interesting topic, Neil. It's an interesting point, this. The key thing is to help the mind be clear and steady. In other words, if you're drugged out of your brain, our common view in our materialist world is, oh, the person looks peaceful. But you know yourself, you could be having a dream, looking very peaceful, but it could be the worst nightmare possible, couldn't it? You know that. So because your body looks peaceful doesn't mean your mind is peaceful. And because this Buddhist understanding says that the dream mind is the same as your mind when you're in a coma, or if you're drugged out of your brain, then the dream will be like a nightmare. It'll be a horrible experience because you'll have no control. You'll be hallucinating and your mind can't be peaceful then. So drugs can medicate physical pain, but also if you're really distressed, it makes you look like you're peaceful, but your dreams, you'll be having these nightmares. It's no benefit at all. So it's the real balance between trying to medicate the physical pain but helping the mind stay clear. And that's why having a beloved friend close to you who can be with you, who can support you, whom you can rely upon, which is what will help your mind calm down. Because we all know when something goes wrong, we suddenly want someone to turn to, don't we? We rely upon somebody. Even if you just get, you have an accident, the first thing you do is you think of someone to call. Because we need to rely upon somebody. So when you're dying, it's when we really need a beloved there, a good friend, a person we trust, whom we know we can rely upon. Do you understand? It's so important. And then even if you are in pain, you still can feel more peaceful. Whereas just to medicate the physical pain, it doesn't help the mental at all. That's really clear, I think.
It's a dead body.
Pardon?
A body for dead.
What, darling?
I'm kidding. Just
Oh.
to choose a body now.
I didn't hear what he said anyway. Neil. The body.
A body. No.
A friend.
Friend.
Oh, a buddy. Yeah, a buddy. We need a buddy, definitely. Yeah.
Is it possible to contact somebody after he has died? The first.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting topic.
Assist him after death. But
That's up to your. It depends on the amount of power you've got, and it depends on the power of the person who's died, isn't it?
And could maybe the bardo be transmitted?
Pardon?
Could maybe the bardo be transmitted?
Pardon, darling?
Through meditation?
Sweetheart, I repeat. The person who's died has to have the ability to be conscious and to know what's going on, and that's only the highest yogis. So if a person's like that, and you're also a yogi, then first they don't need your help anyway, and so either way. But there are certainly things you can do, and this is Rinpoche's instructions all the way through. The weeks and days before, the hours before, at the time, after you stop breathing, once you've left your body, while you're in the bardo, there's always these things to be done. That's what the book is, instructions of how to help. Do you understand? That's what it is. Let me just read then a bit of Lama Zopa's teachings. So does anybody in the room have no interest in reincarnation? I got the feeling from you. No, it wasn't you. That wasn't you talking, or karma. No? Anybody interested in these topics? Not interested in these topics.
What do you mean interested?
What I mean is, it doesn't matter. Just cancel. Don't worry about it. I'm trying to find my book.
Does anyone in the room have any memories of reincarnation?
Yeah, that's always an interesting point. Yeah, some people do have, don't they?
Huh?
I have none whatsoever. I think what they all say, in the Tibetan tradition, as you probably know, there's this, since 1,000 years now, they've got this established system of recognising reincarnated previous practitioners, you know. It's established in the system more than 1,000 years now. And so they all say, when you read about these kids, and there's many in the West now, it seems, there's many little boys and girls who are said to be reincarnated past meditators. And they all say, or even anybody who talks about reincarnation, it's when you're very small, when the memory is still very bright and very sharp. And lots of kids have very clear memory, but I think many parents just ignore it, you know. I mean, there was a recent story about these really devoted Christians in Texas or something, and their little boy just started talking about aeroplanes and a war, and so they tried to take him, and he was talking about remembering it, and they took him seriously. So they followed the whole thing through. They even went to Japan. They recognised a particular boat, the names of the aeroplanes, the soldiers, and they were able to prove all the things that he remembered. But they just said it was, you know, they didn't understand it, but they decided to trust the little boy because he was able to follow it all through. Now, I mean, there are many, 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 many stories like that. But of course, you know, in the West, if you've got a mind that's materialist, you just think it's a load of rubbish, you know. But among all the Tibetans, it's very, or even these kids, it's very strong, especially when you're little, to remember these things. What? What do you say?
No, it's like my daughter.
Oh, hello.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm great.
Good, darling. What's your name?
Mia,
Mia. Happy to meet you, Mia.
happy to meet you too.
Who's this person back there? This boy in the blue shirt. He's your son. What's your name, darling?
Guy.
Who?
Guy.
Guy.
Yes.
Are you enjoying these words that I've been rabbiting on about all these days?
Yes.
Any interesting thoughts in it, all for you? Yeah? You keep coming back, so there must be something. Very interesting guy. All right, let's read some of Lama Zopa's thoughts. He's considered, I'll tell his story, he's considered, the term they use in Tibetan is the term Rinpoche, which means precious one. So he's considered to be one of these. He's from Nepal, he's a Sherpa. I've just been up there recently. We did a trek up there and raised money for their, you know, they had, in the earthquake, some things broke down and everything. But in his past life, he was said to be this yogi called Kunsang Yeshe, this layman, this Nyingma yogi. And then when he passed, he went, before he, like the last 20 years of his life, there was this little hole in the wall, basically, where they used to store the radishes. And he pulled the radishes out and moved in. That became his cave, you know, basically. And so the place is known as Laudo, L-A-W-U-D-O, and it means radish. So he's known as the Laudo Lama, the radish Lama, you know. It's very funny. So he was recognised as a very little boy, and I'm supposed to be now working on the biography of Lama Zopa. And it's interesting because he's a typical example of a little kid who had crystal clear memory. Apparently his sister talks about how from the time he could crawl, the moment Mummy turned her back, little Zopa's up the mountain, crawling up to where they know the Laudo cave is, because he was born down the road. So from the time he could talk, the sister told me, she was only 6 at the time, she'd be so mad at this little brother, because Mummy's always shouting at him, he's out the door, come home, she'd say. He'd say, no, that is my home. He'd always play the role, when he played games, he always played the role of a lama. He would announce the names of all his benefactors from his past life. He'd say they're coming to the puja. He made mud pie dorjis and mud pie bells, and he was just this, and she would be so annoyed with him because he got all this attention, and he'd always been saying he's the Laudo Lama, and he'd remember his friends, and he wanted to go back to the Laudo cave to meditate. She just used to get annoyed with him, you know. And then the mother would try to threaten him and say, all the spirits will come, he didn't care. The lions will come, he didn't care. But when she told him the moon would come and get him, he got very upset about that one. Apparently. So eventually she figured, well, she, you know, because in this Tibetan system, she figured she better ask the local Lama to do a divination and check up if he really is the reincarnation. They do these things, you know. So they checked up, and it seemed like they said he was. So then from there on, he was known as Rinpoche, precious one. Here's this person here. This is his book. Here he is there, this one. I'm his student, they're his student, these people here. He's the boss he's my boss. The spiritual, in this organisation I'm part of, he's the boss.
Buddha is your boss.
What, darling?
I thought Buddha is your boss.
Well, yeah, he's my present boss. He's my current boss in this life. It's sort of like, you know, I'm playing Bach. Bach's dead, but my teacher's like my Bach, isn't it? So Lama Zopa's like my Buddha. You understand? He's the example in front of me of how to be like Bach. Do you understand? That's the role of a teacher. Okay, where am I? Okay, what happens at death? Stages of death. Death is what the yogis have been waiting for, helping death. I've got just a few things here I'll just talk about. Helping others at the time of death is a big responsibility. So, you know, a good rebirth, a human rebirth, is, you know, it depends upon dying peacefully with virtuous thoughts. Again, remember, it's a technical point, not moralistic. When the mind's freaking out, then this just triggers a negative seed. It's this natural thing that happens, you know. So to help the person be peaceful. So therefore, the people surrounding the person who's dying, friends, family, professional carers, have a big responsibility. I'll put it this way, whatever arises in your loved one's mind, whether their thoughts are virtuous or non-virtuous, very much depends upon you and other helpers, how you behave towards them. It's a great responsibility. Yeah. So Rinpoche is saying that the people who help, who give advice and support, and especially the ones, you know, they shouldn't be someone they dislike. So that's what you've got to really, let's say it's your grandma. You've got to know your grandma's mind. You've got to know she can't stand that auntie. You don't blame the grandma for not liking her, but if the poor old thing and she's getting old, she's old and she's dying, don't upset her. The biggest thing is you don't want to upset the person. You want the person to be peaceful. Everything in the room should be nice. It should be what they like. It should be what makes their mind happy, virtuous and peaceful. So keep the troublemakers out of the room, you know. I mean, you hear these nightmarish stories. Nurses who work with dying people tell me you can't believe that, you know, there's the father dying and the brothers and sisters shouting at each other across the bed about who's going to get the money. I mean, like the worst nightmare you can imagine for your poor daddy, you know. At all costs, keep the troublemakers out because you want the person to be peaceful. You've got to know, if you're in charge, I mean, if you're not in charge, you can't do much. But if you can call the shots, you will determine who can come in, who can't, what will be there, how to help your grandma die peacefully and virtuously. That's the bottom line, you know. So in order to ensure that so much attachment doesn't arise, or anger for that matter, so if there's a person they have really strong attachment to, then try to keep them out of the way. It seems weird to us because we don't get this attachment thing. And the other one is, which is very shocking for us, you keep the pets out of the room.
Pets?
Pets, yes.
Why?
Because of attachment. Well, you see, we don't distinguish between attachment and love. We have this grotesque attachment for certain beings. So if you want to have your pussycat next to you at the time of your dying, you're going to have this massive attachment to your cat. Well, guess what kind of rebirth you're going to get, baby?
Okay.
Excuse me, precisely. I mean, we don't realise the difference between attachment and virtue. So if you've got all this attachment, you can't stand the thought of leaving your cat or your dog or your daughter. It's to help your mind be peaceful. It's not trying to be mean to the person. Like you can't see your dog. No, not like that. Because even if it's friends, and maybe your mummy's most attached to you, but if you understand mummy and you know how to help her, you'll be able to manage it. But most people, there's so much emotion around death, tears and crying and clinging and drama. It's the worst nightmare for everybody. And the person we're concerned about now is the dying person. So you really have to control the situation, but in the sweetest way possible, to make it so conducive that your darling mummy dies well. Do you understand? So really,
I don't understand. What's the difference between your child and the dog?
It's not the point.
The attachment?
We're discussing attachment. And the dog, yeah, at least if your child, like if you're helping your mummy die, you're intelligent, you can work out how to behave. But the dog doesn't. The dog just cling up to your grandma and she'll just grasp. The point is to help her mind not be attached. It's a skillful thing, you know. Stop being mean to your grandmother. Do you understand? Can you get the point, Uzi? No. Can you get the bottom? The point is to help your loved one be peaceful. Well, that's all. And if they see their cat and their dog,
if she has attachment to the dog and to the child, obviously, then. But
it depends. Is the child going to? Well, then keep them both out. But if the child is the one who's helping her, then you can be skillful enough to override her and to help her, darling. To help her. That's the point. Use your wisdom, you know. You've got to know the person's mind well, what they need, what is good for them. The next one is, you know, like there's all sorts of things for the Buddhists, things to see, have pictures and that kind of business, Like if it's a Christian, have pictures of Jesus there. In other words, we've got senses. So use the things, the senses, the objects of the senses to help the mind be peaceful. The bottom line through all of this, the point is to help them be peaceful and virtuous. Whatever method you use to help that, that's the point. So clearly, if you've got a Christian mummy, you don't stick a bloody picture of Buddha there. It's ridiculous, You don't talk about it to Buddha. It's absurd. You talk about what's beneficial for them, And the biggest one is what to talk about, because it might be around for weeks. Well, you know ourselves, even when we're not sick, our minds are anxious, always thinking about our bad things, always feeling guilty, didn't do a proper job. And especially when you're dying and you're old and you're sick, or even not old but sick, your mind's is so fragile. So your mind we've never tried to control it all our life, so it's going to be all over the place. So you help anchor their mind. You be a loving presence. Whenever they see you, they should feel relaxed because you're helping them keep steady like a rock, That means talk about nice things. Let's say your grandmother used to go to Mass or something and sort of likes God but hasn't thought much about God and his mind is too confused. You bring it up maybe. Oh, I've been thinking about God lately, Grandma. Then she perks up and goes, oh yeah, well tell her more about God. So her mind can go on to God. Instead of her mind going on to all her worries and her fears, you can use her attachment to think about God. It's intelligent, Think about heaven, looking forward to heaven. This is intelligent for her. It's helpful for her mind. She'll stop clinging to now, because you can't cling to now, because you can't keep it, but you can look forward. At least her mind will be peaceful. It's just very skillful. Talk about her good qualities. We never think about our own good qualities. We want someone else to tell us, but it's very hard for us to rejoice in our good qualities. We love to put ourselves down. This is a really powerful point. Well, then tell your grandmother what a good mummy you've been, what a good grandmother. It'll be like nectar for her heart, Unbelievable to hear this. So important. And let's say it's your mother. Let's say you didn't think she did a very good job. I don't care. Tell her she's a good mother. Love her. Tell her you love her. Tell her you forgive her. Praise her. You've got to have courage to do that if you don't feel it. To help her mind be happy, to help her rejoice herself in her own good qualities. This is so, so important. And if a person doesn't have any faith in God or heaven or Buddha or whatever, then talk about their good qualities, talk about virtue, talk about anything to help their mind be open and spacious. That's the point. That's the point behind it. Are we communicating? And that's up to you. Yeah.
Is it valid also to a Buddhist who's reached clarity? Because all the things you're describing now are very, they're coming from the outside.
Exactly. If you've got clarity and you're a great meditator, and I'll talk more about this, you don't need help, honey. You're fine on your own. You really know what you're doing. In fact, you don't want anyone anywhere near you. Like, go away, Like, there's a friend of mine with this amazing Lama we've had, this extraordinary being who spent years and years and years in caves meditating, getting all these realizations, getting all this clarity, and utterly familiar with this process in his own meditations. He was with one of his students. And then as the death process started, he recognized, he said, go away, this thing had started. So they're best on their own. They know what they're doing. They're in charge. This is the assumption here is for ordinary old Joes like you and me who are having panic attacks and misery and up and down like yo-yos, Do you understand?
Yeah.
If you know what you're doing, leave them alone. It's fine. I mean, make sure they've, given away their possessions. I mean, we call that writing a will. That can be something really heavy for people because people manipulate like crazy, The one who gives the money away as well. But at least if they've given stuff away, they're not going to be attached to it, keeping all this attachment in their mind. Different things like that, And a person who's a Buddhist who's got lots of practices to do, which means reciting prayers, then just recite them for them. They can just sit there, Recite them for them. Say prayers for them. Say mantras. Let them hear the things that make their mind happy, If they're Jews, if they play nice...
If they're not Buddhist and you recite Buddhist mantras, if they're unconscious,
I think it's
still helping?
I think so. I think it for sure can help. I think even just if we can think there's something kind of powerful there in that's virtuous, good enough, I think absolutely you're animals as well. I remember when I was in an old people's home and this poor old grandma, she was out of her brain, she was paranoid in this horrible place. It was noisy, you know, drugged out of her brain with television blaring all day. It's like the nightmare, you know. And I was there with her grandchild. And we just sitting there, and I was thinking how to help. So I just started to sing a mantra. She instantly calmed down. Just the sound instantly calmed her mind down, you know. Or even one person who I went to see who was dying, she was so anxious, you could see she was just freaked out. Physically not so much pain, but just mentally so much anguish. And so naturally her friends who rotated to take care of her, she was living on her own, they'd had the television on. And attachment is such that it needs anything to hold on to. You've got to have an object to hold on to. You know, our mind's like that. So the television, she'd cling to the television day after day. And then one day she knew about Lama Yeshe, so I said I'd play a DVD, or no, it was a video of Lama Yeshe. So I left the video and her friends were going to fix it, and then the television broke. So there was no sound coming. Well, she died in like an hour because attachment had nothing to hold on to. So she was able to be just peaceful, and she died. Because people talk about holding on. That's attachment energy. And you give it, people can hold on for weeks, grasping at anything. There's no benefit because putting off the time that's going to happen. So if you go, yeah, there you go. That's right. Painful because they don't nothing. That's why Lama Zopa says, given that we've all got attachment and it's so primordial, then let them hold on to something that's useful. You can't, there's no benefit to holding on to this now because you can't keep it. But this is why even if your mother, let's say, loved Jesus, I don't know if she did love God or not. Did she love God or anything? Nothing like that. Well, let's say a person does. So you talk about God so she can think about God. Her attachment could go to that. At least that'll help her when she's dying, as opposed to holding on to her body. That won't help. So it's skillful means. The same with the Buddhist one. So your mother, was she suffering when she died? Were you with her?
No.
You weren't with her, no. That's so common. It's not uncommon. It's
She spent 6 months dying in a hospital bed.
on her own or with people around her?
We came and went.
You did.
It was in the UK.
But she might have been peaceful. Was she peaceful at all? No, she wasn't. That's so common. It's not uncommon.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what to do. We don't know what to think about. And you can't bear. Now finally this thing you've dreaded all your life, which you've lived in denial of, has come. That's the point about it. You see, that's why the Buddhist one, Lama Zopa says here, I'll read this to you. This is very interesting, this bit. It's like, given that we've got attachment, at least you can use it to be attached to something that can help you. But even in daily life, if you want a boyfriend, then please kindly choose a boyfriend who's not going to abuse you every day. If you're an advanced practitioner, you won't mind, it'll be your practice. But if you're a regular person, at least have a boyfriend who's not going to be an alcoholic and abuse you and make you go to hell. I mean, you understand my point. Choose a boyfriend who can help you become a better person. That's intelligent, that's using your attachment. If you're going to get a job, be attached to a job that helps you help people, as opposed to make guns, let's say. Given that you've got attachment until you're highly realised, you might as well use it to be attached to something useful. It's intelligence. So it's the same as at death. I remember this book sort of was nearly finished, and I knew there was something that I felt it wasn't finished. I didn't quite know how to do it. So with all these teachings, there's these 40 years of transcriptions, right, of all his teachings since the 70s, and there's this raw hundreds and thousands of pages of words. That's kind of like, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, trying to find some clues in there about what the book needed to have it finished. And then I read this one sentence. It was about this 12 links business. I'll tell you I'll read it to you. Then I thought, my God, I had to study the 12 links. There's this particular teaching called the 12 links of dependent arising. I've never studied it, I've never heard it, and I've never taught it. So I spent 6 months having to study it just so I could do this little chapter. Here it is. The 12 links at the time of death. Okay. So this is, I can't go into all the details now, but it's this process that we're going through throughout a day constantly. Is going through these 12 kind of links in the whole business of the causes of continuous rebirth after rebirth after rebirth. Okay, so let's discuss these 12 links in relation to this human body that we have now. What caused our consciousness to join the egg and sperm in our mother's body? So in past lives, because of this root delusion, ignorance, number 1 link, we created both non-virtuous and virtuous karma, the 2nd link, which planted seeds in the field of our consciousness, the 3rd link. At the time of death of our life, before this one, us humans, who are now human, and then in the past life, as Rinpoche says, we could have been human or an elephant or a kangaroo, he says, craving arose. This is the 8th link. Craving to not separate from this body. In other words, an intense level of attachment. Then fear arose because of the attachment to not wanting to leave the body. That's the one that's the most typical. Because like I said, we're always looking forward to something, and now finally you're facing the fact that there's nothing to look forward to. So there's intense attachment. Intense. We know that. If your boyfriend's about to leave you and you know it's happening, it's like a nightmare in hell, because you cling like a vampire to keep him to stay, because you can't bear not to have it. This is the suffering, the intensity of the nightmare of attachment when you're going to lose the object. You understand this? So then after that, the next one, the 9th link, grasping, an even stronger form of attachment. So this time, Rinpoche says, in our case, attachment to a future human body. How that happened, in what scenario, he doesn't go on about it. So now, in the case of, in our case as humans, the very, so not, try to keep it simple. Sorry, try to keep it simple. Okay. They say, karmically, the main cause of our getting a human body, of our consciousness after death running like a magnet to our mummies and daddy's egg and sperm. The cause of that, from our part, just to get a human body is immense amount of virtuous morality karma, in particular the habit of non-killing. So we've got these different bank vaults, remember? So all the humans on this planet, a virtuous karma of non-killing was triggered before you stop breathing, about this time when the grasping comes. That was kicked in, that was triggered by that grasping, and that programmed you to go to that human mummy's womb. But the next thing we must have had, Rinpoche says, is enormous amount of generosity karma, giving, which is how come we're born to a mummy and have a life where we've got access to things. Look at the world, the number of humans utterly, completely poor, never have enough money, never even have money, work 18 hours a day for a bowl of rice, the starvation, never making ends meet, even in rich countries. This is lack of generosity karma. Generosity karma and non-stealing is what causes us to have access to anything. We might be poor, you know, but if we can find food when we need it, if we can get a job when we need it, if we can get credit from a credit card company when we need it, it's like a miracle. This is the fruit of our past generosity karma. So not only, Rinpoche says, did we have strong morality karma, not only did we have strong generosity karma, and you need that just to have a decent life, so you can have the luxury and the leisure to then actually pay attention to your mind and develop spiritual practice. If you just have to survive every day, you can do nothing more than eat, sleep and go to the toilet. So it's a luxury which we created by our past generosity, to have enough leisure that we can actually afford to use time to think of the meaning of life and go beyond eating, sleeping and going to the toilet. But not only, Rinpoche says, at the time of our death, did we have the morality, generosity karma, we must also have had this 9th link, grasping for a human body, the future. So either we had thought about it, or you'd seen a human person there. So if I speculate with this one, if I think about your pet, your dog or your cat, instead of killing it, you know, bring it home, have it there close. Now your dog especially, dogs have got so much attachment for us, haven't they? They're like personified attachment, it seems to me, doggies, you know. They look at you with the most total love in the whole world. They're totally attached. And so you can use that for your little doggy woggy. Right? Have it there, it sees you every day, it totally relies upon you. Even if it's sick, it doesn't matter, it's got you. You make him feel safe. Then you put mantras on, you make it feel safe, and that strong imprint, I'm sure, is what Rinpoche is sort of saying. The imprint so strongly in his mind of you as a human, behaving nicely around him, having an imprint of you in his mind, and hearing the Dharma, this can trigger a virtuous karmic seed when he stops breathing, and he can get him a human life. This will be the way it works. It's a dependent arising. All these different conditions come together, you know. It's not set in stone. So whatever reason, whatever it was that triggered it at the time of our past death, not only did we have the morality that caused the human body, not only did we have the generosity that causes to get a decent life and a decent country, we have money, access to it, so we can have leisure, so we can practice, but we must have had this, you know, connection with the human life. Might have seen a human at the time we died. Who knows what, you know. Or if you are a human, dying now, then in this life, wanting a human life when you die. This sounds so odd to us that we've never thought of reincarnation, you know. But in the same way, the main cause for my walking out that door is the thought, I want to walk out the door. The main cause for my coming to Greece is the first thought, I want to come to Greece. Well, guess what? The main cause of getting a human body is I want a human body. You don't just say that. I just didn't say I want to, you know, I want to go out the door and don't lift my legs up. I've got to create the cause, which means walk out the door. But the first step is intention. Everything exists on the tip of the wish, Rinpoche says. It's a Tibetan saying. It means karma, intention, I want. So in the same way that I want to go to Greece, caused me to create the cause to get to Greece, buy tickets and all that, then I want a human birth. Then what are the causes of getting a human birth? Morality, generosity, goodness, practice, program your mind, give up attachment, blah, blah, blah. Try and hear it in a practical sense like that.
I have a question.
Yes.
How is it, maybe you've already done
Where are you? Oh, yes, darling, go on.
How is it that people are born into human births with like wealth and
Yes.
if it came from their having been generous
Yes,
and
that's right.
virtuous in the past,
That's right.
how come so many of them are greedy?
Because that's the next track of karma. There's one track of karma is your actual life, the body. And the next track of karma is the experiences you have. The third track is called all your experiences, being rich, being poor, being beautiful, seen as ugly, being raped, being loved, being hated, all the things that happen to you, what you have and how you're treated. But the other one is what you've got in here. They're two separate tracks, honey. You can be born with, I've got friends in prison who are, you know, might have done one wrong thing and got a life sentence, but they're pure, they're clear, they're moral, they're kind, they don't lie, they don't steal, but they're treated like animals. Equally, like you just said, a person who's got all the best in the world, beautiful, rich, and they're mean mothers, you know. So there's two separate things.
Okay.
That's really clear to understand. What you're born with internally, and what you get. They're two separate tracks. One could equally be from stealing in the past, where you're always poor, but you could have real generous attitude in the mind now. One could be you've got lots of riches from generosity, but due to your mind now, you're really mean and nasty and never share a cent and lie and steal. Do you understand? It's crucial to understand those.
But why would your mind now be mean if your mind...
But it's from different sets of karma. There are millions and millions and millions of seeds in our ground.
Okay.
And so they happen to come together. That's the tragedy.
Okay.
You know, so many people have got such good fortune, but are mean and lie. I mean, they say apparently there's more wealth in America. They said there's more wealth in tax havens than in the country itself. People don't want to pay taxes. They're liars and they steal. More wealth in tax havens or from the earnings of Americans than there are in the actual economy of America. That's intense. That means people lie and steal. Which just means they'll just get born as a hungry ghost next life, or with no money.
So in short, karma does not constantly improve. I mean,
Of course not. It's not. No, nothing consciously improves until you work on it. Your garden will not naturally improve until you work every day on it. Yeah. Nothing does. If the seeds are all there, if you're born in this life, okay, look, there was one of Lama Zopa's students, she's a Tibetan woman, and she's known as she's a Lama, she's a highly realised being. Her name, there's a term in Tibetan out of respect for all these female Lamas, they're known as Kandrila. It sort of means like sky goer. And she's this blissful, amazing female person, this woman, this practitioner, this Lama, this yogi, this realised one. So Lama Zopa says she came into this life fully developed. So she's on a roll. She's got no negative seeds left. She can only keep getting better or only keep staying at perfection because she's got no longer work to do. Do you understand?
what happened to Buddha after he died?
Well, this is the thing, he's reincarnating all over the place. Has to be. That's what Buddhists do.
So it
Doesn't mean you recognize them.
reincarnated and
All the time.
and become bad in many cases as well.
No, that's not
Like
possible.
this example.
No, that's not possible.
No.
Once you get, even well before you get to fuller development, once you've realised emptiness, I touched on it briefly, once you've cut the root of the misconceptions, you can't fall back anymore from there. You can only go forward. Otherwise, what's the point of all this hard work if you can lose it again? Do you understand? Why bother?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said when you reincarnate, you can go reverse. So
No.
what about him? What happens?
Once you become an enlightened being, you perfected these two wings. Perfect wisdom, perfect compassion. You can't go back.
And this is the teaching Buddha, right?
This is the fellow who lived 2,500 years ago in India, yeah.
And his name is the teaching Buddha.
His name is known as, the teaching Buddha means, okay, what they mean by that is, the countless beings have achieved this state. But he's known in this time as the one whose teachings we are following. He's the guy who gave the teachings in this particular time historically.
So this particular guy,
This person who lived in India, yeah, he was this prince or
and
something.
the other Buddhas with the different...
Oh, okay. So that's, okay, I understand. Okay. Okay, so, no, there's, okay. No, listen, there's, what to say here? Okay. All right. There's many similarities, you know, in some of these different, the way I put it, over the centuries, all these different beings, human beings. I mean, I have great respect for any human being who, as Tibetans would put it, who do more than eat, sleep and go to the toilet. That's how Tibetans say it. It's very nice. So it seems to be lots of, we call it religion, okay, but I don't want to even use those words. It seems to be over the centuries amazing human beings, you know, in all the different cultures. Australians, you know, 40,000 years before even the white people came along, all those little aboriginals. The people in India, the people in every country you find, the Christians, the Jews, the Muslims, all these labels we have for all these people over the centuries. All these humans working really hard, it seems to me, and trying to find the meaning of life. Well, how can you not respect them? And it seems to me, if you look at it, so many have come up with similar observations. I mean, if you look at the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims and the Buddhists, some of these yogis have seen a thing called hell. They all agree. They've got different explanations of what it is and how come you get there. That's where the differences are. Do you understand my point here? So when I remember a talk a couple of years ago I gave at the Australian Catholic University in Melbourne, my city, and I decided just to talk my little 20-minute slot. I discussed the similarities between the definition of God and the definition of Buddha. Well, I just looked up the Merriam-Webster dictionary for the definition. It was right there. 3 essential qualities: omniscience, perfect wisdom that sees things as they are, infinite compassion, and omnipotence, infinite power. That's the definition of a Buddha as well. So if you take that, how we talk about God, and I'm sure Jews talk the same way, I'm not sure, but the Catholics and the Christians do. God, the real meaning of God is all-knowing, all-seeing, all-compassion, all-pervasive energy that is everywhere, right? Anybody's been a Christian? You've learned that, isn't it? I know as a Catholic, I was in love with God. And I used to think about God is everywhere. I'd try to work out, I'd say God is in the light switch. God is in my homework. I'd try to work it out, God is everywhere. I'd try to get it, you know. I'd be at Mass every morning. I knew all the Mass in Latin, and I was yearning to be oneness with God. You know, it never happened, of course. But I remember loving the idea of God, pervasive, all-knowing, all-seeing, this energy, right? So, of course, the Christian teachings would say that's God, and He made us all. The Buddhist says, hey, babies, everyone can become that. And they call that Buddha. But He's not a creator. It's not a he or a she. Everybody who is a male or a female or a dog or a cat or an ant or a worm or a hell being possesses naturally the potential, like we're talking the whole day in this time, the whole place, the whole time. We've got this potential to develop to perfection our consciousness. And that for the Buddha is what becomes a Buddha consciousness. So when Uzi becomes a Buddha, your consciousness, which is not physical anyway, but which at the moment, like us, is locked inside this body, right? We can't see past our own nose. We don't remember 99% even of today, because our minds are as thick as posts when they're functioning through this bag of bones here. But as we progress spiritually, lessening our delusions, growing our capacity for clairvoyance and clarity, literally eventually when you've removed all pollution, developed all goodness, you become what they call a Buddha. Well, it's the same as the concept of God, but not a creator. Don't need creating, because your consciousness has always existed. But that potential for perfection and goodness, now that's the meaning of the word Buddha. So that's existing. Now the point is, what why you become a Buddha is because you're driven by compassion. You want to help others, which I keep promising to talk about. We will. That's the purpose of everything we're talking about so far. The wisdom wing prepares you for the compassion wing. So by the time you've achieved this perfection, what's driven you to this is your immense empathy for others. You cut the sense of a separate I completely. That's wisdom. You have this infinite empathy and connectedness with other beings as if they were you. So that's what a Buddha is. So that what drives them is this immense compassion. So they, we're all as thick as posts, so we can't see God. Okay, I know the Jews and the Muslims don't like images, and you can see the historical evolution of that. Whereas the Christians are into images that represent God. Well, the Buddhists are into images too, look, that represent. That's kind of an image that reminds you of this person called Buddha 2,500 years ago. In the same way they'll have a photo of my mummy. I know it's not my mummy, but it reminds me of my mummy. So it's a reminder because we're beings of shape and form, So the Buddhists are really into that, especially the Tibetan Buddhists. So okay, Buddha is all-knowing consciousness. So in the same way that as in Christians there's one God, you could argue there's one Buddha. In the sense that when Uzi is fully enlightened, his consciousness pervades the universe. Paros is fully enlightened, his consciousness pervades the universe. Aleka, yeah, that's right. I know a friend of mine who spells it the same way, but she calls herself Aleka. But you're Aleka.
Anika.
Alika.
And A-double-N-I-K.
Oh, Anika. Oh, Anika. I'm so sorry, darling.
Is that right?
Okay, so anyway, let's say she's Buddha. You won't be bumping into each other in the sky, You'll be. This is why it does sound cosmic, but this is when the mind is completely non-dualistic, when you've got the same wisdom, the same compassion, and it's purely subtle, pure, conscious energy. Well, what good is that, though, to peanuts like you and me? So out of your great kindness, you manifest in a body that I can see, and I can hear your words. So this bloke called Buddha is a human manifestation of the energy of a Buddha, basically. So this is why the idea of Jesus works very well for the Buddhists. Jesus is the manifestation of God in a human form to help humans. So that's the idea. So therefore, in that sense, you can say there are countless manifestations of Buddha consciousness. So that's where all the different Buddhas, like you're talking. And that's a more advanced level, because there's another level the Buddha manifests in is in a subtle light body, only for the great yogis who can see in their meditation, and they can receive teachings at a subtle level. Those pictures depict all that. And basically all those pictures depicting Tara who's female, and this one who's male, big wrathful ones, sweet ones, female ones, sexy ones, whatever. They're all different. It's really just Buddhist psychology at this more advanced level, which if we've got time we'll mention in brief. They're just representing different psychological qualities, either that you want to develop, such as compassion, or that you want to purify, such as attachment. So one of these Buddhas is called Vajrayogini. She's this gorgeous naked red lady. She's the manifestation of purified desire energy, attachment energy, and you practice her in order to help you purify your attachment. So really it's just another level of psychology, although to us it doesn't look like psychology. So that's what these Buddhas represent. They're just manifestations. And they're just tools that you use to help you cultivate those qualities. Does that make sense, Uzi? Okay. All right. Back to death. Okay. So, okay. All right. So basically...
If
yes.
you live this virtuous life and you're doing the best you can from here on out.
You can guarantee you'll die with a happy mind and get another decent human birth next time, because you're in charge of it.
Your past karma will affect your...
You've got billions of past karmic seeds that you're carrying with you right now. So what you're doing in this life is living a really virtuous, good, solid life, training yourself in virtue, stopping training in non-virtue, so that when you do die, the seeds that might have been grown 1,000 lives ago will be the ones that will be triggered. It mightn't always be the seeds you trigger in this life, but you're enhancing and you're ensuring that the situation at death is good, and so the virtuous seeds will be the ones that ripen. That's the plan. So this is roughly what happens. This is a summary of what happens at the time of death. Even though we all go through I'll describe these 8 stages. Okay. Even though we all go through the 8 stages at the time of death, what I describe here is a gradual death. Those who die violently or suddenly go through the stages very quickly. In other words, you know, the 8 stages of death is this natural process that does occur. Well, it's like walking, it's like falling down 100 floors or walking down 100 floors. You still pass down through the 100 floors, but if you fall, you go very quickly, and there's not much time to control it. So the same with these 8 stages. Does that make sense? Well, it's a funny analogy, but there you go. And sometimes in a violent death, the mind could leave the body immediately. Usually they say it takes up to 3 days for once you've stopped breathing for the mind to actually leave the body. And there's various ways of judging all this, and we can talk about it. As I mentioned, the great meditators, those who are deeply familiarised themselves with these stages in meditation during their lives, they can recognise the stages of death as they occur, and they can meditate throughout, you know, and then they can choose their next rebirth and all that. They're in control, you know. But ordinary people don't recognise them. We go through these stages every time we sleep too, but we don't recognise them then as well. It's like when you're, okay, so it's the same at death. We don't recognise the visions. They talk about these different visions that occur in each of these stages, which if you're trying to meditate on this, you try to imagine these 8 stages. So at least when you do die, you can be a little bit familiar and less scared of it. And certainly when you go to sleep, you can practice this as well. It's good to help your loved ones meditate on these stages during the months and weeks before death. Okay. So the first level of death, the first stage it happens. All right, there's these different components, okay? There are different components of a person. And you might remember all these, I'll just say them out to you. This is according to the Vajrayana, the Tantrayana model, which I mentioned to you is based upon this view that the entire physical world is made of the 4 elements, and then all consciousnesses are inextricably linked to their own set of the 4 elements. So there are various components that make us up according to this model. This is the same as the Tibetan medical system. This is similar to the yoga one, the Hindu one, you know. In order to better understand the process of death, which I describe in chapter 9, I'll read it through, it's helpful to understand what makes up a person. Okay. So first of all, they talk about we've got the 5 aggregates. There's one way that Buddha taught what we're made up of, but I don't want to go into that now. No need for that. Don't worry about it. We've got the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, water. This is how we used to talk in our time, in the medieval days, isn't it? Science. Now we've got a million other elements. We've got gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, and extremely subtle consciousness, which are inextricably linked with our gross body, this one, subtle physical energy, that's well, I'll go through, and then very subtle. So the wind energies, so the gross physical energy in our case is this body, inextricably linked with our gross sensory consciousness. So the first 4 stages of death, these gradually cease, and exactly the same at the time of sleep, and you'll see when I describe it. Once your breath stops, you're not dead. Now your subtle consciousness is there, which is like the coma mind. It's like the dream mind. It's your subtle consciousness that doesn't depend upon your brain. And that's why people can report out-of-body experiences. There's this very interesting book I read while I was doing this book called The Undead. It's not about zombies. It's this American medical journalist who'd done lots of research on all the contradictions and problems now that are coming up in America particularly over the business of farming organs, getting organs, people leaving their bodies, people coming back, people waking up in the coffin. There's been reports of this over the centuries in all the cultures, but now it's becoming a really big point because people get ready to cut someone's liver out, you know, and they're not dead. Or people, there's contradictions. I mean, I didn't read the whole book, but it was very interesting. And he had one whole chapter in there. Himself, he says he's sort of atheistic about all. He's kind of has no views about these things. But he's a very funny fellow. It was actually quite a funny book, but very kind of interesting. He was quite critical of that whole industry, you know. So he had one whole chapter on people who report out-of-body experiences. So this fits perfectly with the Buddhist view. That's your subtle consciousness, your dream mind. And so many people in all cultures report this. But of course, if you're a very determined materialist, you just think it's a load of rubbish, you know. So he was saying like this, but he reported one particular woman who, according to the medical profession, could have had no consciousness whatsoever. They had to practically make her dead before they did this operation, a very sensitive operation on her brain. But she reported the most vivid out-of-body experience. So the doctors just can't deny it. They just can't deny. So even one doctor who was reported being around this scenario, he said, I can say now with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I have no idea what it is, but that much I can say. So that's why I think it's so good they're doing all this research now, And he's quite cynical about the whole profession. Manipulating, they're the elitists, they get the most money, and all the, the dysfunction because of that. And he was quite cynical, actually. It was very interesting. And I'll tell you a very interesting point too about when they pull the organs out. So you got the subtle body is made up of this subtle nervous system, like 72,000 subtle channels pervading the body. Then the subtle wind energy or prana coursing through those channels, and then all of our different states of mind. And this is clearly not how we talk. Connected to all those different winds. Like I said, that's why if your Tibetan doctor feels your pulses, she can feel this kind of imbalance of a certain wind energy that she knows is related to your attachment. That's why you're having panic attacks and anxiety, So she'll give you herbal medicine that'll calm the wind energies down, which is this subtle physical energy, and that helps your anxiety calm down because your mind is connected to that, It's a bit similar to, you go to your doctor and you take your serotonin and it fixes your chemicals so your depression is less. Depression's the mind. The chemicals are the physical. Well, the same here. The winds are the physical, but your mind, but they're connected. Do you understand? So you've got the subtle nervous system, you've got the wind energies that course through all those 72,000 subtle channels and all the different states of mind connected to them. Then you've also got these different points in the body where these channels kind of converge and get all kind of constricted, and they're called chakras. And these are a drag, and I'll explain why. All these constrictions here, 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 below the navel, and 3 down below, along the penis for the male and internally for the female. So the channels, the wind energies, and then there's this subtle liquid energy called kundalini, and there's a red drop, they call it the drops. There's a red kundalini and white. So these, from this perspective, come from your mother and father at the time of conception. So at the time of conception, when our mind has left the past body, and we'll go through this, your consciousness then goes to this intermediate state in between the death and the life, which is like, again, similar to the coma state, similar to the dream state. It's a subtle consciousness. And then eventually when that stops and your new mummy and daddy hop into bed, now that's the old-fashioned way. We know there are new ways of getting conceived now, so it's very interesting for the yogis to look into this. But when your mummy and daddy join, the red and the white, like the egg and the sperm, we call them, there's a subtler level of energy there, and they call that the red and the white drop. So your consciousness joins that red and white drop, the sperm and the egg as well, but that red and white drop, then you start at your heart chakra. That's where you begin in your mother's womb. The subtle red and white drop from your mummy and daddy, your very subtle consciousness conjoins with that, and then you develop in the womb. And all the bits and pieces of you grow into the fetus. And at the time of death, everything deconstructs down to that very subtle consciousness. So you've got your gross consciousness and your gross body, your subtle consciousness and your subtle body. So during the next 3 stages, the subtle body and subtle consciousness deconstruct, 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 and eventually the red kundalini, which mainly is at the navel chakra, and the white kundalini, which are these ones that come from the product of your mother and father, they're now in your own body. The white one resides up here. Eventually, the 8th stage, this red and white one come to here, join this indestructible drop from your mother and father. And your consciousness, your very subtle consciousness is there. And this is the subtlest level of you. And then eventually, when the time is right, that very subtle consciousness, or the clear light consciousness as they call it, will leave that red and white drop, and that's when you're finished. That's when you're dead. That's when you're dead now. You're not dead till then. Okay.
What, the organs?
Huh?
The organs?
Huh?
You said the removal of the organs?
Yeah, I'm going to go to that. I'll tell you about that. Okay, so now, I think that's I mean, I don't need to go through all the 8 stages in great detail. There's no reason. But I can say a little bit, briefly, I'll give you a little brief analysis of them. Various things happen. I'll just say simply, and I'll try and just show you how we're familiar with this process. So let's say I'm having a chat to Panos, but I'm tired. Well, the first stage of death, various things occur at each stage, deconstruct. The first one is your earth element, your body. So you know your body feels very like lead, isn't it? You feel like lead when you're tired. But the other one is your eye consciousness begins to cease at this first stage. Well, there I am chatting away. You can hardly keep your eyes open, but you can hardly see much, can you? Isn't it? We have that experience when you're really tired. So your eye consciousness is ceasing, the earth element is ceasing, you know, your body is becoming heavy like lead. These different other parts of your mind, for example, you can't, when you're wide awake and wound up, they talk about the 5 wisdoms. But so one of them is this one where you can hold a lot of information. When you're wide awake, like even now, we're very sharp. We can see many, many things with a lot of information we can hold. But as I'm sitting there talking to Pano, my mind is becoming tired. My mind's kind of shrinking. I can hardly see anything. My body's like lead. I can hardly hold any information because these elements are deconstructing, ceasing to function, you know. The second stage, my water element begins to dry up. This is at the time of death and sleep. Well, right now, and also what will happen is my ear consciousness will cease. Well, I just missed that last 5 seconds, didn't I? I'm embarrassed. I didn't hear what he said. You're still sitting up like this, but you all know this happens. You stopped hearing because your ear consciousness is ceasing. Everything's kind of going in, this energy, you know. You know, when you're very tired, like when you're driving, you just can't keep awake. It's so kind of compelling. All these bits and pieces of you ceasing to function. Then and then the third stage, about this point, before your ear consciousness goes, which is the third one, the second one, at this point is when you can still hear things, you can still put a little bit together, but basically at this point, this is when the grasping kicks in. The grasping, the ninth link, and this is when the karmic seed that will determine your next life is already triggered, even before you stop breathing. So by this point, they say, you can tell the kind of life a person's going to get, because once that karmic seed has been triggered, some people die very blissfully. You see them looking into the distance, because their mind's getting more subtle. And then you almost like you've got some clairvoyance. And if you're going to have a good life, they say literally it's like an experience of going towards the light. And if you're going to have a difficult life, next life, like a suffering life, it's like going towards dark. So some people die with like absolute terror, like they're seeing monstrous visions. Well, they say that's like seeing your future life. It could be a really suffering rebirth, you know. And if you're dying very peacefully, and this is occurring already before you even stop breathing, you can see it by the way some people die. A friend of mine in Cairns in Australia said she was with a guy, she'd never seen anything like it in her life. He became like this monster. His eyes were like rolling back in his head. He was shrieking in absolute terror. Never seen anything like it. Some people, like Steve Jobs. I'm a real fan of Steve Jobs. I love it. This is a really nice story. His sister and he were adopted, and they met later in life, and she was there at the time of the day he died. And she was describing it. And he knew he was dying. He was really getting ready for it. You could tell. So let's say Panos is Steve, and I'm the sister looking, and his 2 daughters are in front of him, and I can see their backs, but he's looking at them. She said he was looking at them with such love in his eyes, begging them to forgive him for having to leave them. In other words, not clinging frantically, don't leave me, I don't want to die, you know, really blissful, she said. Such love in his eyes. Then she said he looked over their shoulder into the distance and he went, oh wow, oh wow, oh wow. And then he died. I think that's a nice story. So the Buddhist view is that means his mind was blissful, his mind was virtuous, it triggered a virtuous karmic seed, and his future life's already programmed, you know. And as you're getting more subtle, you can literally see. That's how they say, you know. You know, just
great iPhone in order to get it.
Yes. So anyway, so that's before you even stop breathing. That's why it's then when mummy needs you. It's then when your doggy needs you. And then it goes through these 4 stages. Now the next one is, we'll say more later, but I'll just tell you briefly. So by the time you stop breathing, this is the thing about the organs now. This is very fascinating. Then, of course, because the West says you're dead already, they keep you breathing. That's what I didn't even realise until I almost finished this book. They keep you breathing. So you're all warm and toasty. You look like a living person. Well, the Buddhist view is you are a living person. Your subtle consciousness is still there. You haven't died yet. So the Buddhist view would be, if the consciousness it actually had left your body, there's no way in the universe you can get a dead body to breathe. You can get a dead body to be warm. It's the warmth and the breathing is the proof that the consciousness is still there, but at a subtler level. Do you understand my point? So they keep you breathing, and then they might keep you for several days dealing with things, organising everything, checking up on this and that. Then they get you on the bed, and this is the point about in the book now. He said that this particular what happens, they get you on the stretcher in the operating room, and they don't give you anaesthetic, because as far as they're concerned, you're dead. But your subtle consciousness, and this is the thing I want to say too. Okay, I'll say it in a minute. Okay. The nurse monitoring the heartbeat said when they picked up the circular saw to cut her from head to toe, cut her bones open, with no anaesthetic, she observed the heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. And he said, I wonder what a dead person has to be worried about. Now, if that does not indicate there's a consciousness there, and the point is this, we know we can go to sleep and not have dreams, right? And we know that means, like I said, I gave that example of myself in retreat. I was conscious even when I was dreaming. I was conscious of the outside. Well, that can also be with a person in a coma. You can be in a coma, but you can be aware of what's going on. And I think that result proved that her subtle consciousness was conscious and she was observing what was going on. Maybe she might even have left her body, that experience of leaving your body. Do you understand? When that woman was in the deepest coma, and the other one I mentioned, who had to have this radical procedure, and in the chapter in this book, you know, the one who had such a radical procedure that as far as the medicos were concerned, she couldn't have been conscious, but she reported the most vivid out-of-body experience. So that's her subtle consciousness. So in this case, the one who was so-called dead, obviously her subtle consciousness was clearly conscious of what was going on, knew that they were going to cut her open. So of course her heart would go to 200 beats a minute. Well, basically what I'm getting at, if the Buddha's view is correct, then taking organs, you're killing somebody, because the mind hasn't left yet. You can't keep an actual dead body breathing and warm. The warmth is the proof that the mind is still there. And the point is, after, you know, if you want to move your body of your loved one, normally, like I said, they take 3 days. It could be sooner. And the proof of it, because all the energies, I'm describing all this death process, all the energies are gradually going up from here, up from there, and everything gathers to the heart chakra. So the easy way to prove whether the mind is still in the body is if you put your hand, this will be your dog as well, put your hand above the heart chakra, and the rest of the body will be really cold, but it'll be vividly warm. That means the mind is still there. That's the proof. And it's quite easy to prove it. So in the case of taking the organs, by keeping the person breathing, then you're keeping their mind in the body. You can keep them breathing for 6 weeks, the mind can never leave the body, because all the organs are keeping them to be there. The mind can't leave while it's like that. That's why, you know, as soon as you turn off the machine, the person leaves the body, they die. So that one seems to me is really powerful. The heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. And you're seeing your own body cut. And so as soon as they cut you, then of course your mind will forcefully leave. That's basically killing, you know. And imagine the fear in your mind then. That would be terrifying. So that was interesting. I thought that was interesing.
What about the usage of these organs? I mean,
well, that's all very fine. Of course, all the lamas would say, actually, Lama Zopa says it as well in here. Unfortunately, I didn't read that bit about the heartbeat until after I'd done the book, but I did tell him some things I'd read in the book, and so he says here, you know, this is really a discussion they have to have, because basically it is killing a person. But he said he felt that the motivation of the person giving their organs would mean that their death would still be peaceful. That's what he thinks. But another Lama I asked, he said differently. So I mean, I couldn't put that in here, it's not his book.
Lots of similarities to Judaism.
There you go.
Many things you said.
Okay, that's interesting, isn't it?
A lot.
That's interesting, I know. Well, that's what I'm saying, really, that there are many great beings over the centuries have come to observe similar things. That's the way to say it, isn't it? Don't think it even as believing. All this information we've called Jewish, we've called whatever, is coming from minds of humans. So it's so rude, like these bloody materialists are so arrogant. Oh, they're all these idiots who believe in creators. Who do they think they are? I mean, it's beyond arrogance, really. I mean, there's amazing humans over the centuries. I have great respect. And it's true, there are many similar observations. Different interpretations, obviously. That's the difference, the interpretations, and that's why we should be open. But it's very moving, I find. Very inspiring, actually. Well, why don't we have lunch?
Yes.
Oh, it's not lunch yet, is it? Tiki. But it's, no, you don't have lunch at 1:30, do you?
Again?
Lunch is not ready till 1:30, is it?
No.
Okay. Well, you can leave now. Well, you have questions. Have questions, darling.
Is there any, what's the Buddhist thought towards someone dying and you, instead of...
Start again, darling. Melanie, start again. I missed you.
In your natural state, when you're about to die, if you're anxious or
Yes.
are going to the hell side, say,
That's right.
is there any case for giving drugs to assist, which you know will make, just like depression?
I understand, darling. I forget what point you came in because we discussed this earlier. Maybe you weren't here then. But it's okay, Melanie. But one of the difficulty is that with drugs, it only works on the grosser level. You know, if you can, you know yourself, you can be fast asleep, right? Looking peaceful, but you're having a nightmare. It's possible, isn't it? So this subtle consciousness, the way Buddhism talks, that's like the mind that dreams. So medication doesn't medicate your mind, it medicates your body. So your body might look peaceful, but you can be in chaos in your mind. It's not going to help your mind. This is the Buddhist view, very clear, you know. So the key thing, is what we talked earlier before, I think when you weren't here, the key thing is the way to help yourself, help a friend when they're dying, your loved one, is to be their support, to be there to make them peaceful, to make them calm, talk about their good qualities, to have them hear nice prayers and things that keep their mind calm, to keep the room very peaceful. That's the key way to help them be peaceful and virtuous. You're literally holding their hand through this process. That's the most powerful, because that alleviates the anxiety or the fears. That's the main one. That's how this book, Lama's Opus, talks about that. Yeah, not drugs.
When
Well,
we talk about compassion,
yeah, we're going to do that after lunch. We'll talk about compassion after lunch. So you want to stop now then? Have your break now?